if you put a blanket ban on something like social media and you stop children from being able to access it, won't they just find other ways around it?
I think we do have to make changes. I just don't know how they're going to implement it in a way where everybody is happy and everybody is safe.
So last Thursday, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, he made a very big announcement, which is something that we have all been talking about. It is around raising the age for kids using social media. So currently, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware, 13-year-olds and below are not able or shouldn't be able to access social media. And they're wanting to raise the age of that to what's been proposed 16 years old. This is going to roll out across all of Australia, but specifically Meta, so TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. It could also roll out across YouTube. It hasn't been, the policies themselves haven't been finalised, but it's something that they're hoping to have rushed through before the end of the year, and this policy will be in place by the end of 2025. When we first heard about this concept, and it's definitely made its way into the pop culture realm as well. And the reason for that is because Whipper, who some of you might know, Fitzy and Whipper, they do the breakfast show on Nova. Whipper's been really strongly behind this very public push called Raise the Age 36 months, which was the petition that started this conversation. Now, when this very first came out and I saw it, my first initial reaction was incredible. Yes, we should be raising the age of kids using social media. We all know it is well documented how damaging, how toxic, and how insidious social media is for young kids who are being exposed to content that is far more mature for their abilities to comprehend.
That was my initial reaction as well.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck yeah, this is brilliant. This is what we need. Actually, interestingly, I had some friends forward me news articles from around the world on this topic. Australia, breaking news, Australia looks to ban, and they were all celebrating. People from Switzerland, the UK, America, so many different people. And that is how huge this news is, because we have so much freedom on social media. But the fact that this went around the world and other people were messaging it to me, and I asked them, I was like, what do you think about that? And they were all clapping hands, celebrating. They were like, this is what the world needs.
Yeah, it's a world first. Well, it's not specifically a world first, but of its kind it is. Now, I also shared it on my stories on the weekend. I reshared an Instagram post that was celebrating the fact that the age was going to be raised. And I was really surprised by the responses. It was such a mixed bag. And I think if you had asked us earlier, I would have thought that it was so obvious that this was a good thing. But the more that I unpacked it and the more that I had conversations with the people who had an issue with it, the more that we have done some research on it, it has really left a really big question for everybody here. And that's why we wanted to discuss it as to whether raising the age is a good thing or whether it can have a lot of complications that come with it also.
It is so complex. And I think the issue for me is, and I've been trying to listen to the pros and cons, and I don't have kids, so it's really hard for me to know what a lot of parents are dealing with in the day-to-day, when their child comes home upset about something, if they've seen them consuming something they shouldn't. I'm not exposed to that, but I know myself, if I had children, I would not want them to be on social media.
Yeah.
So as a blanket statement, I can say I would be happy if social media didn't exist and kids didn't even know what it was until 16. That's my perfect world. The problem is we don't live in that world. And what has been proposed, it's not enforceable, it's not policeable. Nobody actually knows what it's going to look like yet, which is a bit of the criticism that people are receiving now after this announcement. This bill has not passed yet, but I think a lot of people are getting carried away with a lot of clickbait that's going around. Everyone's thinking, oh, this has happened. This is coming into fruition in 12 months. It's not yet. It looks like it will. But I also understand that we're in a society now where, when I think of my childhood, I would say, yes, I would love my kids to be in that childhood. I would love my kids to not know what the internet was or social media. I didn't have it and I turned out just fine. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world where kids are learning. They're not writing on chalkboards anymore. They're doing things on iPads. So in a way, I have to almost check myself and check my bias around it, because I'm like, we do live in a world where kids need to have that connection and exposure.
Well, to give you the details on how this has kind of come to light so far. So the presentation that Anthony Albanese has done, he has said that there's going to be no grandfathering on these laws. So it basically means that any children who are under the age of 15 now, because if it takes a year to come in, 16-year-olds will be exempt from it, but under the age of 15 now, so under the age of 16 when it comes into effect, they will no longer be able to be using social media even if they currently have social media. So they will have to have the accounts removed. The area where this gets really tricky is because there's the big question around how is it going to be enforced and how is it enforceable? He's come out and said that the parents and the children will not be liable. So if it does turn out that a child under the age of 16 has a social media account, there's not going to be consequences for that child, and there won't be consequences for the parent, even though it is something that is, quote unquote, enforced. The consequences will lie for Meta. Now, currently, Meta itself, it can be fined if there are users under the age of 13 who are using the platform, and those fines can be anywhere up to $1 million. But it's a really, really challenging thing to police. And I think for anybody who's been on social media and knows the platform, all you have to do is tick a few buttons and to prove, and quote unquote, that you're over the age of 13. So there's a lot of grey area at the moment as to how this is going to be enforced. That hasn't been fleshed out yet, but there has been a lot of concerns that have been raised by child safety online experts, which says that even though this sounds great on paper, I don't want to use the word performative, but it almost feels slightly performative because it is a real blanket rule that's going to have no real life impact or significant influence on how children use social media. I kind of liken it to alcohol, for example. And it's probably even more accessible and easier than alcohol because to get alcohol, kids have to go into bottle shops. Like we know that there's a process to do that. But as kids, we were all drinking under the age of 18, or a lot of us were. A lot of us would go to parties, there would be alcohol present. And so the question is if you put a blanket ban on something like social media and you stop children from being able to access it, won't they just find other ways around it? And we all know that when kids are doing things in secrecy and then there's shame attached to it, that if something really troubling or a problem does arise, if they're accessing that content, but they're doing it in an environment where they're not allowed to, it creates an imbalance where the kids can no longer go to their parents and say, hey, mum, I've experienced this really scary, frightening, intimidating thing online. I'm either being bullied or I've seen pornography or something that I don't know how to deal with. Because the response to that in a lot of ways is going to be, well, you shouldn't have been on the platform in the first place. So now it's creating an environment where kids are going to do it anyway, but they're going to be scared to talk about it, which could essentially be more unsafe.
But I don't know. I don't know if I feel the same. I think sometimes the unknown is not fathomable, or it's a really scary place to be until you're there and it becomes normalized. So I want to liken it to think back to when smoking was fine and deemed healthy. People used to smoke in a hospital while they were giving birth. That was standard. You'd smoke your whole pregnancy. You would drink at any age until laws were brought in to say you can't drink under 18. Of course, people still did it, but we knew that was the limit. You can't smoke in a hospital anymore for this reason. Shocking at the time. People couldn't believe it. But all of a sudden, time goes past, the next generation comes through and it becomes a normal thing. Now, yes, people are still going to do it, but I think it comes back to having that really good family life or the connection with your kids and your parents. So I would hope that it becomes, generations come through where it's normal and you just know that social media is one of those things that you do when you grow up.
But I guess my worry for it is that this is the language that students and kids are using, right? Like kids use social media. They use it to interact. They use it to communicate. They are so social media literate that it is their wheelhouse. Whereas as adults, a lot of the parents are simply not social media literate. A lot of the advisors, a lot of people who work in politics, they're not social media literate, but they're coming in and putting in place these policies. And all that sort of says to me is that they say, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to understand you and how you communicate and where you communicate, and I'm going to make the platform that you communicate on safer for you, I'm going to tell you you can't use it anymore. We were speaking about this on radio as well, because it has permeated a lot of conversations today. Michelle Mitchell, she's a child specialist. She speaks about child behaviour, and her take on this whole thing, which I thought was really interesting, is that she said that a lot of the parents who are extremely excited about this change have tweens. They have young kids who they are scared shitless about them getting and having social media. And so they want to prolong that for as long as possible. But the parents of teenagers who have 15-year-olds or 14-year-olds or 16-year-olds who are living in the world that they're living in currently online are like, this doesn't work. It doesn't support these kids or keep them safe in the way that you're hoping it will.
I think one of the biggest problems here is the fact that the age is 16. It's just too old. And it's crazy to think that you could be going to work every single day. You've left school, you're in your car, driving to your job, but you can't be on social media.
imagine if you are someone or your kid is someone who started school when they're 4 years old, so that when they're in year 10, they're still 15. And they decide after year 10 that they don't want to continue with school. They want to go to TAFE and they want to do a different degree or whatever. They want to do a skill or a speciality or whatever. They go to TAFE and they do marketing. You can't do marketing in today's currency of how we communicate and how we advertise without understanding social media. So it's like, it almost feels like the drastic jump from 13 to 16 is too great. Like the age gap and the age distance is too much. And I don't know what would have been a better solution. Like, is it 14? Is it 15? Or is it simply that 13 is the correct age and that there needs to be better parameters around the accessibility for people who are 13 to 16. It just feels as though it's a huge amount of responsibility to dump onto a 16-year-old who hasn't had the skills or the experience or the learnings to be able to manage a platform either.
Having said that, I still do think 13 is too young. Like your first year as a teenager, think back to 13, that's leaving year 6. That's going into high school. So I don't think that's the right time either. And we have made a lot of focus on the fact that this is Meta, right? We're using the big companies like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all of those things. But this will flow into things like YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, basically any other platform that serves as people connecting online. Like that's essentially what this blanket statement would look like. This is where I think there needs to be a little bit more time and care taken, because YouTube can also be a cesspit, but things like YouTube can be very educational as well. And I know we can say that about all social media.
Is that going to mean that then kids find alternate social media platforms in order to connect on? Social media platforms that are less regulated, that are less safe, that have less rules and less guidelines because they've kind of slipped underneath the blanket of what has been and hasn't been restricted. I just think, look, I mean, like I said, I'm in two minds about it. I know something has to be done, but I don't think a blanket ban is going to be the fix. Yes, it will allow some parents to be able to have that conversation with their children later. It'll push that down the track a bit. Like, hey, sorry, you can't have it because it's illegal. But what happens if they go about getting it anyway? What's the solution then?
But then that raises the question, just because people are going to do something anyway doesn't mean it shouldn't have restrictions around it. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be illegal. Like I said before, we know kids are going to go and drink and do drugs and try all that stuff. We know that they're going to find a way. Of course they're going to find a way. Of course they're going to find a way to be on social media. But that doesn't mean you don't have to make it any more difficult for them or put restrictions on there so that they're more hyper aware of it actually being an issue, and it's been an issue for a reason. It's almost like trying to make the best of a bad situation. That's how I feel. And when I think about some of the things that go down online, it's an absolute fucking cesspit. It is a cesspit that kids are not equipped to handle. And I know they still need this connection, and I know they still need it for education. I'm so about that. But when you see what the other side is, and you see the kids that have taken their life purely from being bullied online, I think we do have to make changes. I just don't know how they're going to implement it in a way where everybody is happy and everybody is safe.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that where the real initiative needs to start, and where I think we'll see the most change, is by cleaning up the platforms, is by using AI to better make it a collectively safe place. I don't believe for a second that there isn't the capability, the infrastructure or the technology to clean up social media and to make the content less of this kind of like free speech, say what you want, you can live your own life and do whatever you want online, and then there's very few rules about it. And I think that should be a responsibility that falls on Meta, that if you're going to have accessibility from 13 years, if that's what you have put as the benchmark, then the content that's on your platform needs to be appropriate for someone who is 14, 15, 16 to be able to view. Legislation is never as fast as what is actually happening. That's the real issue, is that these platforms move at such pace and at such speed. People adopt the new ways of using technology. Kids especially, we're early adopters. We want to use the things that are at our disposal. We're all using AI at the moment. Where's the legislation around what you can and can't do when it comes to AI? Like, the rules are so slow at catching up to where we actually are in real life. And I think that that's always going to be the place that we're at with this type of technology. That's why it kind of feels a little bit futile, and it feels a little bit like we're celebrating a win that isn't really a win, because I just don't know if it's going to have the overarching effect that we all want it to. Like, we can all be hopeful. No one's saying it's a terrible idea, but I just don't think it is worth the amount of excitement that it's receiving, because I just don't think it's going to be as effective as we hope it is. Having social media for some people gives a sense of community, and it gives a sense of something that's bigger than them. There are ways in which it is positive, and like, am I saying that they outweigh the negative? Absolutely not. But I think that maybe it's around having more restrictions for people who are of a certain age group. Maybe that age group of 13 to 16 should have a different online experience that's managed in a different way, that has restrictions around it, rather than simply saying you can't use it.
I personally love that it's been actioned. I do. It's not the right answer, but I love that people and groups are taking the initiative enough to go and literally try and change laws to protect their minds.